The call from the insurance investigator was polite, routine, but his question turned my blood to ice. "Mr. Thomas, can you confirm you authorized changing your life insurance beneficiary 2 months ago?" I had authorized no such thing. My son-in-law had. He forged my signature on a $500,000 policy, cutting out my daughter and grandkids. I'm a retired attorney. For 35 years, my job was finding the flaw in a story, the crack in a contract. Now I was the client. The policy was meant to protect my family. Instead, it became a weapon used against them, and the man who wielded it was sitting at my daughter's dinner table. This wasn't just fraud. It was a betrayal that demanded a specific kind of justice. The policy was straightforward. A $500,000 term life policy I'd taken out when my daughter Sarah was born. For 30 years, the beneficiary was my wife, Elena. After she passed, I updated it. 50% to Sarah, 50% into a trust for her 2 boys. It was a simple, clean piece of paper meant to say, "I love you" from beyond the grave. I retired 3 years ago from the firm. My partner, James, took over my caseload. I traded depositions for golf, contracts for crossword puzzles. My world shrank to a quiet, predictable rhythm. Sundays at Sarah's house for dinner, Wednesdays with my grandsons at the park. It was a good life, hard-earned and peaceful. Sarah married Mark 6 years ago. He was a commercial real estate broker. Charming, ambitious, always talking about the next big deal. At first, I liked his energy. He seemed devoted to Sarah. He was good with the boys. But over time, I started to notice the gaps in his stories. The deal that was just about to close for months. The new car he leased, then traded in 6 months later. The vague explanations about working late. I dismissed it as the stress of a competitive field. I'd seen that drive in young lawyers before. What I couldn't dismiss was the phone call I got from Sarah last September. Her voice was thin, trying to sound casual. She asked if Mark and I had spoken about any loans. I said we hadn't. There was a long pause, then she said, "He took a second mortgage on the house, Dad. He said it was for a business opportunity, but the payments he missed too." The bank called. My stomach dropped. That house was their stability. I told her to come over to bring the paperwork. When she arrived, the documents were a mess of high-interest terms and balloon payments. Mark wasn't there. He was, according to Sarah, at a networking retreat. I spent that night doing what I'd done for decades. I followed the money, or at least I tried to. The trail was a series of dead ends and shell companies with PO boxes. It had all the hallmarks of someone in over their head scrambling. I confronted Mark the following week, not as a father-in-law, but as a lawyer. I laid out the mortgage documents on my desk. I asked him for a business plan, for financials, for anything concrete. He gave me charm and deflection. He talked about market cycles and investor confidence. He never gave me a number. I gave him an ultimatum instead. He had 60 days to get his family's finances in order, to refinance that predatory loan, or I would step in with a forensic accountant. He looked at me with a coldness I hadn't seen before. He said, "I appreciate your concern, Thomas, but this is my family. I'll handle it." The 60 days came and went. I asked Sarah. She said things were better. Her tone said otherwise. I decided to give him 1 more month. That was my mistake, because while I was waiting, Mark was acting. 2 weeks later, I received a routine notice from my life insurance company. It was an annual statement. I almost filed it away without looking, but a habit from my practice kicked in. I always read the fine print. And there, on the second page, under beneficiary designation, was a line that stopped my heart. It listed a single beneficiary, Mark Anthony Walsh, my son-in-law. The 50-50 split for my daughter and grandsons was gone, replaced entirely by his name. The effective date of change was 5 weeks prior, right in the middle of my 60-day ultimatum. The method of change was listed as signed paper form. I had signed no form. I pulled the original policy documents from my safe. My hand was steady, a professional calm settling over the panic. I compared the signature on the change form, which the company had included in the packet, to my own. It was a forgery, a good one, but not perfect. The tail of my T was wrong. The pressure on the downstroke was off. It was a fraud, a $500,000 fraud, and it was already in motion. I picked up the phone. My first call wasn't to the police. It was to my old partner, James. He was now the senior deputy district attorney for the county's financial crimes unit. When he answered, I didn't say hello. I said, "James, it's Thomas. I need a consult, and you're not going to believe what we've got." James arrived at my house within the hour. He didn't bring colleagues or a sense of drama. He brought a legal pad and the calm, analytical focus of a man who'd spent 20 years deciding which cases were worth the state's time. I laid it all out. The policy, the forged form, Mark's financial spiral. James listened without interrupting. Then he leaned back and said, "Okay, Thomas, walk me through what you didn't tell the insurance company." He knew me. The first story is for the initial report. The second story, the one with the gaps and the gut feelings, is what builds a case. I told him about the missed mortgage payments, the shell companies, the coldness in Mark's eyes during our confrontation. I told him my deepest fear, that this wasn't a desperate one-off crime. It was a calculated move by a man who now saw my death as his financial escape hatch. James made notes in a tight, precise script. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute. Then he looked at the forged signature again. "It's good," he said. "Not perfect, but good enough to slip past an admin at an insurance company processing thousands of these. He had to have studied your signature, which means he had access to documents you signed." That hit me like a physical blow. He was right. Christmas cards, birthday checks for the boys. Mark had been in my home countless times. He could have taken a stack of envelopes from my desk. The violation deepened, becoming intimate. James outlined the landscape. On one side, we had a clear-cut case of forgery and attempted fraud. We could go straight to the police, file a report, and let them handle it. It would be messy, public, and would likely destroy my daughter's family. On the other side, we had my unique position. I was the victim, but I was also a lawyer. I could engage with the insurance company not just as a policyholder reporting fraud, but as opposing counsel gathering evidence for a much larger civil and potentially criminal case. "If we call the police now," James said, "Mark gets a public defender, the case gets pled down to a lesser charge, maybe some probation and restitution. He stays in your daughter's life, and that $500,000 motive doesn't go away. It just gets quieter." He let that hang in the air. "Or," he continued, "we treat this like the white-collar crime it is. We build the case from the outside in. We start with the insurance company's own fraud investigation. We use their forensic document examiners. We subpoena Mark's financial records under the guise of the insurance dispute. We map the entire scheme before he knows he's under a microscope. Then, when we have it all, we don't give him a plea deal. We give him a choice, full confession and a guaranteed prison sentence, or we take everything public and let a jury see what he tried to do to his own children's future." It was a prosecutor's playbook. Isolate the target, control the timeline, remove all avenues of escape. It was also brutal, and it meant I had to lie to my daughter, at least for a while. The next day, I called the insurance company's fraud hotline. I played the part of the confused, concerned policyholder. I asked how such a change could happen without my authorization. The representative was apologetic and initiated a priority review. What that meant, in reality, was that their internal security unit would pull the change form, scrutinize it, and likely send it to their contracted forensic lab for signature analysis. It would take weeks. That gave us time. My next move was the hardest. I invited Sarah over for coffee, just her. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from constant, low-grade worry. I didn't mention the insurance. Instead, I asked about the mortgage. She said Mark was working on it, that he had a new investor. Her eyes didn't believe her own words. I made a decision then. I couldn't tell her the full truth yet, but I couldn't leave her in the dark completely. I took her hand. "Sarah," I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have reason to believe Mark is involved in some serious financial irregularities. Beyond the mortgage, I am looking into it. For now, I need you to be careful. Do not sign any new documents he brings home. Do not co-sign anything. Check your credit report. And most importantly, do not tell him we had this conversation." She looked terrified. "Dad, what's happening? Is he in trouble?" "I don't know the full extent yet," I said, which was true, "but I am going to find out. And I will protect you and the boys. Do you trust me?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. It was the first fracture in their marriage, and I was the one holding the chisel. I hated it. But the alternative, her finding out when the police came to the door, was worse. 2 weeks later, the insurance investigator called me back. His name was David. His tone was no longer polite routine. It was sharp, professional. "Mr. Thomas, we've completed our preliminary review of the beneficiary change form. Our forensic document examiner has identified several points of inconsistency with your known signature samples. We are formally classifying this as a suspected forgery." He asked if I had any idea who might have done it. I gave him Mark's name. I told him about the financial pressures. I did not tell him James was the deputy DA. David thanked me and said their investigation was now active. They would be freezing any further policy changes and would be in touch. He also said, almost as an afterthought, "You should be aware, sir, that if this is proven, it constitutes insurance fraud. That is a felony. We are obligated to refer confirmed cases to the relevant state authorities." That was our foot in the door. James now had a legitimate, parallel investigation he could monitor. The insurance company would be our unwitting evidence-gathering machine. Then, we caught our first break. A subpoena James quietly filed for Mark's bank records came back. They showed a pattern that was textbook desperation: multiple maxed-out credit cards, cash advances, and 3 large, recent deposits from a company none of us recognized. James traced it. It was a hard-money lender, the kind that charges 30% interest and uses your car or house as collateral. The total borrowed was $180,000. The due date was in 90 days. The penalty for non-payment wasn't just financial. The loan agreement had a clause about asset recovery. It was a shark's contract. Mark hadn't just been drowning. He'd been throwing anchors overboard. The life insurance policy was Plan B. It was Plan A. The $500,000 payout would clear his debts, give him a fresh start, and leave my daughter with nothing. The cold calculation of it took my breath away. James assembled the timeline. The loan was taken out 70 days ago. The beneficiary was changed 50 days ago. My ultimatum to him was 60 days ago. It was a sequence. He got the loan, I threatened to expose his finances, and he moved to secure his escape route, my death. But James frowned at the board we'd created in his office. "Something's missing," he said. "The forgery is competent, the timing is logical, but this," he pointed to the loan documents, "this is sloppy. This is a screaming red siren on his financial record. If he was smart enough to forge your signature, well, why would he borrow from the most predatory lender in the state? It doesn't fit." That's when I remembered the second mortgage, the one Sarah had told me about. We pulled those records too, and that's when the picture changed entirely. The second mortgage wasn't for a business opportunity. It was for $100,000, and the disbursement of funds didn't go to Mark's business account. It went to an entity called Granite Peak Holdings. We dug deeper. Granite Peak Holdings was registered to a lawyer who had been disbarred 5 years earlier for investment fraud. And that lawyer had a partner, a silent partner whose name we found on an old incorporation document from a different failed venture. The name was Raymond Glasser, Mark's uncle. The pieces snapped together with a terrible, logical clarity. Mark wasn't just a failing broker. He was involved in something with his uncle, a known fraudster. High-interest loan, the second mortgage, it wasn't for his business. It was capital for their scheme, and they were losing it fast. The life insurance forgery wasn't just Mark's idea. It was a pressure release valve for a much larger, much uglier operation. My policy wasn't the target. It was the closest liquid asset. James looked at me, his face grim. "Thomas," he said, "this just went from a family crime to an organized fraud. We're not just building a case against your son-in-law anymore. We're building a case against a conspiracy." He picked up his phone. "I'm calling the state's Financial Crimes Task Force. We need to move, and we need to move now, because if they're this desperate, they won't stop at forgery." The state's Financial Crimes Unit operated out of a nondescript office building downtown. The room they brought us to wasn't like the movies. It was beige, filled with whiteboards and the hum of computers. James introduced me to Special Agent Mara Vance. She didn't offer platitudes. She looked at the timeline on the board and said, "Tell me why your son-in-law and his uncle think they can get away with this." For the next 2 hours, we walked them through everything. The policy, the forgery, the loan, the connection to the disbarred lawyer and Raymond Glasser. Agent Vance listened, her team taking notes. When we finished, she stood up and went to the board. She drew a circle around Raymond's name. "Glasser," she said, "we know him not for this. He was a person of interest in a mortgage fraud ring that collapsed 3 years ago. They used straw buyers, inflated appraisals. It fell apart before we could make charges stick. He vanished." She turned back to us. "If he's back and he's pulling his nephew into a new scheme, then the life insurance forgery isn't the crime. It's the cleanup. They're burning through capital. They need a liquidity event. Your death, Mr. Thomas, was their emergency exit." The floor seemed to tilt. This wasn't personal animosity. It was financial calculus. I was a line item on a balance sheet. Agent Vance laid out their plan. They would open a formal investigation into Granite Peak Holdings. They would subpoena bank records, phone records, and email accounts. They would put physical surveillance on Mark and Raymond, but to do it without spooking them, they needed the insurance company's fraud case to stay active and visible. I had to stay the confused, cooperating policyholder, and I had to keep Sarah in the dark for a little while longer. It was the hardest role I'd ever played. I went home. I watered the plants. I made dinner. I pretended my world wasn't being dissected in a beige room across town. A week later, Agent Vance called James. Their forensic accountant had traced the flow of money from Mark's second mortgage and the hard money loan. It didn't go into Granite Peak's business account. It was wired to an escrow account managed by the disbarred lawyer. And from there, it was split into smaller amounts and sent to a dozen different individuals. They're building a roster, Vance explained. They're paying investors with new money. It's a Ponzi scheme, a small one but growing. The life insurance money was meant to be the next big influx to keep it running. Then she delivered the second piece of news. Their surveillance had seen Mark meeting with his uncle Raymond at a roadside diner, and Raymond had brought a guest, a man they photographed and ran through databases. His name was Leo. He had a record for assault and arson. He was a freelance enforcer. The meeting was brief. Money changed hands. Leo left with a piece of paper. The theory in the war room was grim. If Mark and Raymond were desperate enough to forge a signature for $500,000, and now they were paying an enforcer, their desperation had entered a new, dangerous phase. The target was no longer just my policy. It could be me. James insisted I stay at his house. I refused. This was my home. But I did agree to security measures. Cameras at every door. A panic button by my bed. I was a prisoner in the house Carol and I had built. The anger that replaced my fear was cold and focused. They had stolen my peace. They had weaponized my love for my family. Now they were threatening my safety. The legal game was over. This was a fight. The break in the case came from an unexpected direction, the insurance company. Their forensic document examiner had completed her full report. She concluded with 95% certainty that the signature was a forgery. But she included a technical footnote. The form had been submitted not by mail, but through the company's online portal. It required a scanned copy of the signed document. The digital file had metadata, and in that metadata was a creation date, a modified date, and crucially, the name of the computer that created the PDF. The computer name was Mark WLSH Laptop. It was a breathtaking blunder. In his haste, Mark had scanned the forged form using his own computer, and he'd never scrubbed the file properties. This was the direct, digital fingerprint linking him to the crime. Agent Vance called it a gift. With this, they could get a warrant to seize that laptop. And on that laptop, they would find everything. The plan accelerated. They would execute the warrant on Mark at his office the next morning. Simultaneously, another team would pick up Raymond Glasser. They would be questioned separately, each presented with the evidence. The forged form, the digital fingerprint, the financial trail leading to their Ponzi scheme. The goal was to get one to turn on the other. I asked to be there, not in the room, but nearby. James arranged for me to be in the observation room adjacent to the interview suite where they'd bring Mark. I needed to see his face when he realized the game was up. The morning was cold and gray. I sat in the observation room with James, watching through the one-way glass as two agents led Mark into the interrogation room. He wasn't in handcuffs. He was dressed for work, but his confidence was gone. He looked smaller. He kept asking what was going on, his voice audible through the speaker. They read him his rights. They laid out the insurance fraud charge first. They showed him a copy of the forged form. He denied it. He said it was a mistake. Then the agent slid a second piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of the metadata analysis. The agent pointed to the line identifying his laptop. Mark's face went pale. He stared at it. The denial died in his throat. The agent spoke quietly. "We have a warrant executing at your home right now, Mark. We're seizing your laptops, your financial documents. We've already seized your Uncle Raymond's records. We know about Granite Peak. We know about the escrow account. We know about the payments to Leo." Mark's head snapped up at the mention of Leo. That was the crack. Fear flashed in his eyes. The agent saw it too. He leaned forward. "Your uncle is in the next room. He's facing decades. He doesn't strike me as a loyal guy. Who do you think he's going to blame for all of this? The nephew who brought him the life insurance idea, or the enforcer he hired?" It was a masterful play. They presented Mark not as a mastermind, but as the weak link, the one who would be sacrificed. For 20 minutes, Mark sat in silence, crumbling under the weight of his own choices. Then he did what desperate men do. He tried to save himself. "I want a deal," he whispered. "I want immunity." The agent shook his head. "Immunity's off the table, but you can help determine how many years you spend in a cell. Start talking. Start with the forgery." And Mark talked. He confessed to forging my signature. He said he'd practiced it for weeks using checks I'd signed for the boys. He said he mailed the form himself. He thought the digital scan was anonymous. He was just that arrogant. Then he was asked about Leo. He clammed up, his eyes wide with a different kind of fear. The agent pressed. "What did you and Raymond hire Leo to do, Mark?" Mark shook his head. "I don't know anything about that. That was Raymond. I didn't want that." "Didn't want what, Mark?" The agent's voice was deadly calm. Mark looked at the mirror, right at where I was sitting, though he couldn't see me. His voice broke. "He said we needed leverage. He said if Thomas wouldn't die on his own, we had to make the policy pay out another way." The air left the observation room. James went rigid beside me. On the other side of the glass, the agent was stone-faced. "What way, Mark?" Mark put his head in his hands. "A viatical settlement," he mumbled. "Sell the policy to a third party for cash now, but the companies only buy if the insured is terminally ill." Raymond said. He said Leo could arrange an accident, a bad fall, something that would look like the start of a decline. Then we'd get the diagnosis, sell the policy, and split the cash. The room spun. It wasn't just fraud. It was a plot for murder, or something so close it didn't matter. The insurance policy had a 2-year contestability period. If I died within 2 years of the forgery, the company would investigate intensely. But if I became gravely ill, if I needed to sell the policy to pay for care that was a cleaner, quieter profit, I was a healthy 67-year-old man. They were going to make me sick. James's hand was on my shoulder, holding me steady. On the other side of the glass, the interview was concluding. They had what they needed. Mark was led away. James turned to me, his face a mask of professional fury. "Thomas," he said, "it's over. We have him. We have Raymond. We'll pick up Leo within the hour. The case is made." But I was looking through the glass at the empty chair. The legal case was over. The family case was just beginning, and I had to go tell my daughter that her husband had just confessed to plotting her father's death. I drove to Sarah's house in a silence so deep it felt like a physical substance. James offered to come. I said no. This was a father's duty, and it was the heaviest thing I'd ever had to carry. The boys were at school. Sarah was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher. She looked up, saw my face, and the plate in her hand slipped into the sink with a clatter. She knew before I said a word. "Dad," I guided her to the kitchen table. I took her hands in mine, and I told her everything. Spared her nothing: the forgery, the Ponzi scheme with his uncle, the hiring of the enforcer, Mark's confession, the plot to make me ill. Her face went through stages I never want to see again: confusion, denial, a dawning horror that seemed to fracture her from the inside out. When I finished, she didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, staring at the wall. Then she asked, her voice a ghost of itself, "Did he ever love us, or were we just part of the scenery?" I had no answer for that. No lawyer ever does. The next 48 hours were a blur of grim procedure. Mark was formally charged with forgery, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Raymond Glasser was charged with all of the above, plus solicitation to commit assault, based on the plot with Leo. Leo himself was picked up trying to board a bus to Nevada. He quickly agreed to testify against Raymond in exchange for a reduced sentence. The house of cards collapsed in a single afternoon. Sarah filed for divorce. I helped her find a bulldog of a family lawyer who secured a temporary restraining order, froze the remaining marital assets, and began the process of untangling her from the financial wreckage Mark had created. The bank foreclosed on their house. Sarah and the boys moved in with me. My quiet, empty home was suddenly filled with backpacks, toy trucks, and the sound of cartoons. It was chaos. It was a lifeline. The legal proceedings moved with the slow, grinding certainty of the state. Mark, through his public defender, took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to the forgery and fraud charges in exchange for testifying against his uncle and for the solicitation charge to be dropped. He was sentenced to 8 to 12 years in state prison. He would be eligible for parole in 5. At his sentencing, he was given a chance to speak. Stood thin in his jail uniform and turned to look at Sarah in the gallery. "I'm sorry," he said. It was hollow, a word worn smooth from overuse. Sarah looked straight ahead, her expression unreadable. She did not cry. Raymond Glasser, with his longer record and his role as the architect, fought the charges. He went to trial. Mark testified against him, detailing how his uncle had pressured him, had devised the insurance scheme, had hired Leo. The digital evidence was undeniable. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Raymond was found guilty on all counts. He received a sentence of 22 to 30 years. He'd be an old man when he got out. As for my $500,000 policy, the insurance company, upon official notification of the criminal conviction, voided the fraudulent beneficiary change. The original designation, 50% to Sarah, 50% to the boys' trust, was reinstated. They also, after some negotiation from James, paid a small additional sum to cover the legal fees I'd incurred during their investigation. It wasn't an admission of fault, they said. It was a goodwill gesture. I cashed the check without sentiment. The money went into the trust. It was safe. The immediate storm had passed. But the aftermath, the rebuilding, that was the real work. Sarah started therapy. The boys started therapy. We became fluent in a language of feelings I'd never learned in law school. There were nights of rage, days of a sadness so profound the house itself seemed to sigh. We got through them one at a time. 6 months after Mark was sentenced, Sarah got a letter from him. She brought it to me unopened. "I don't know if I should read it," she said. I told her she didn't have to. She could throw it away. It was her right, she thought for a long time. Then she opened it. She read it silently, her face a blank page. When she finished, she handed it to me. It was 3 pages of cramped writing, apologies mostly, self-pity, excuses about pressure and his uncle's influence. But near the end, he wrote something that surprised me. He said that the day the agents came to his office, a part of him was relieved. He said he'd been living in a cage of his own making for years, and he was tired of running. He said he hoped one day far in the future, the boys might understand that he was a sick man, not a monster. Sarah took the letter back. She didn't tear it up. She put it in a box in the attic. For them, she said, meaning the boys, when they're older and have questions, they can decide what to do with it. That, I realized, was her first step toward reclaiming her own narrative. She wasn't forgiving him. She was archiving him. A year passed. Sarah went back to school, getting her certification to become a paralegal. She said she never wanted to feel that powerless about the law again. The boys, resilient in the way children are, began to thrive. My house stopped feeling like a refuge for refugees and started feeling like a home again, just a different, louder, more vibrant one. Then, last week, I received a final piece of paper. It was from the state's Department of Corrections. It was a notification that Mark Anthony Walsh, inmate number, had been transferred to a minimum security facility as part of a work release program. He was up for his first parole hearing in 18 months. The news sat on my desk for a full day. I didn't tell Sarah immediately. I needed to think. The law had done its job. It had contained the threat, punished the crime, protected the assets. But the law has a calendar. It has released dates and hearings. It doesn't deal in forever. That evening I took a walk. I passed the park where I used to push my grandsons on the swings. I thought about the case, not as a lawyer, but as a grandfather. The system had given us time for Sarah to get strong, time for the boys to grow roots in a safe place, time for the poison to work its way out. When I got home, I showed Sarah the letter. She read it, her jaw set in a way that reminded me of her mother. She wasn't scared, she was resolved. "Okay," she said. We knew this day would come. She had a plan already. She would submit a victim impact statement to the parole board. She would outline the financial and emotional devastation. She would request that any release be contingent on him having no contact with her or the children. She was no longer a victim pleading for protection. She was a stakeholder statting her terms. I realized then that we had won something more valuable than the $500,000. We had won back our agency. The plot had been to make me a statistic, an unlucky sick man, to make Sarah a widow in all but name, to make my grandson's future a line item in a fraudster's ledger. They failed. The foundation, the one made of love and stubbornness and the simple daily act of showing up, had held. I am a retired attorney. I spent 35 years looking for cracks in stories. The most important case of my life taught me that the story you refuse to accept is the one you have the power to rewrite. The money is in the trust. The boys are asleep down the hall, and my daughter is in the living room, studying her law books, building a future no one can forge. In the end, the most valuable thing they tried to steal wasn't the money. It was the story of what our family was and what it would become. They wanted to rewrite the ending, turning a legacy of care into a transaction. And that's what this kind of fraud really is, a theft of narrative. The statistics tell a cold story. Insurance fraud steals an estimated $80 billion every year. A significant portion of that is life insurance fraud. And in those cases, the perpetrator is rarely a stranger. It's a family member, a friend, a caregiver, someone who stands to gain not just money but silence and a rewritten history. They exploit the ultimate vulnerability: trust. We are told to prepare these documents to protect our loved ones: a will, a life insurance policy, a trust. We sign them with love, imagining they'll speak for us when we cannot. We never imagine they'll be used as a blueprint for betrayal. What I learned, both as a lawyer and as a grandfather, is that protection requires more than a signature on a form. It requires vigilance. It means reading the annual statements, not filing them away. It means knowing that the people closest to the assets are often the ones under the most pressure. It means understanding that no is a complete sentence and that a boundary is not a wall against love. It is the frame that holds love in place. My daughter asked me once if I regretted not going to the police immediately that first day. I told her no. The swift, public route would have contained Mark, but it would not have uncovered Raymond or the Ponzi scheme or Leo. It would not have dismantled the entire structure of deceit that threatened more than just my policy. It would have left a poisonous root in the ground, waiting to grow again. Justice, the real kind that brings safety, sometimes requires patience. It requires building a case so solid that there is no shadow left for the truth to hide in. That's what we did. So what do you take from a story like this? I hope it's not simply fear. I hope it's a reminder. Review your documents. Talk to your family about your intentions clearly while you're healthy. Make your wishes known in more than one place. And if something feels wrong, if a signature doesn't look right, or a financial story doesn't add up, trust that feeling. Follow the paper trail. Because the paper trail, in my case, led back to a computer named Mark Walsh laptop, and that trail led to a prison cell, and that cell made space for my family to breathe again. The law is a tool, but it is a passive tool. It sits on the shelf until someone has the courage and the clarity to pick it up and use it. I'm a retired attorney. I spent my career holding that tool for others. I never thought I'd need to wield it so personally, so fiercely, for the people I love most. But I did, and I would do it again, because some structures you build with steel and concrete, and some you build with truth, one hard fact at a time, until it's strong enough to hold the weight of the future. Thank you for listening.